shortly.
Hello.
Oh, we're back. We lost each other for a second there.
You can't get rid of me that easy.
I don't know what happened. I was trying to look around. Mate, after all this, do you know what really excites me about when I speak to you and I see you're passionate about your wrestling? Mate, tell me about, you went from fan, mate, you've got all the figurines all over the world.
Yeah.
You love this game. How did you go into promoting of wrestling? Did you know wrestlers? Did you create them to make a show? How did all that format start out?
Yeah. I just seen Grant Barker just join. Hey Grant, good to see you. This is a legend of Australian kickboxing. Actually fought Vasyl Klitschko in kickboxing.
Oh really?
Yeah, many years ago, like I think 1992. Correct me if I'm wrong, Grant. But yeah.
Wow.
Incredible.
Excellent.
Yeah, so look, I grew up around that scene. At the same time
Yeah.
that I was working as a journalist on the boxing side, I was starting on the wrestling side. And I used to always have a goal in my head. So I know that you're somewhat of a wrestling fan, so you would have grown up and seen Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, all those magazines on the newsstand. So I always had this goal from when I was like 9-10 years of age that I wanted to work for Bill Apter. Bill was a senior editor of those magazines, but he also had a TV presence. And I remember always thinking, like, when I was coming through in that industry, just like in my mid-teens, so I was getting active as a journalist. The internet's the best thing in the world because it gave everyone a platform.
That's right.
But it gave everyone a platform, including...
Let me just go on to this. Could you imagine this world COVID-19 lockdown without the internet? Holy shit.
Well, it would give the government more of an opportunity to control people, but yeah. But you know, in terms of you don't have your own soapbox or your own voice or your own outlet, but yeah, absolutely. So, so I remember just like setting those goals, and then in '99, Bill went from Pro Wrestling Illustrated to Wow magazine. And I was like, this is really cool because Wow magazine was one of the first publications that they used to publish the emails of the editor, they published the email address of the writers. So I remember I was in year 12 at school and I thought, you know, let me write a pitch to Bill. So I wrote a pitch and I said to him, look, you know, I can go give you local coverage. I'll show you what I can do. So it was like I'd say like it was probably around August, because it was just before I turned 18 as well, like August of 2001. I get an email back from Bill saying that he's going to give me a trial run in the magazine. And Well then got rebranded. It became Pal magazine. And then So basically from when it came out on newsstands when I was 18. So from when I was 18 to 21, I worked under Bill for 3 years. So got to live my dream. I was at the WWE had a tour in Melbourne, the Global Warming Show, which was at what's it called, the Telstra Dome. What's it called now? Etihad Stadium.
Oh yeah, Etihad Stadium. Yep.
Like I think like 54,000 people there, and I covered that show for the magazine. And then it just got to a point when I was in my early 20s, where it was either I was thinking to go and work an internship at the WWE, so I go to Connecticut for a couple of years and chance my hand working as either a journalist or like a backstage writer for them and just see how far I could take it, or just commit 100% to the boxing journey. And just boxing was just more firmly entrenched in my veins, so to speak. So that's the direction I went.
But
then, in regards to promoting the shows, so I was always kind of around the local scene. So I know a lot of the local industry workers and that. And then I was like, you know what, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it someday. So one of my best friends, Benny, he twisted my arm to start operating regular shows. And compared to the boxing, it's very, very straightforward to operate. You know, you don't have the same overheads and you don't have the same element of risk.
So I suppose what is the difference? I suppose it's like you said. Well, you just hit it there, didn't you? It's less overheads. I suppose that's the main stressful part about local boxing, especially without any TV revenue. I suppose, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So you're basically running at just a local level. So you got it's hard, very little sponsorship. Some shows I might be able to generate $500 to $1,000 in sponsors, which is pretty good because, say, like a mid-tier wrestling show can budget at about anywhere from $4,500 to about $6,500. So it's not that big a risk, but it's also like unlike boxing, you can't generate as much at the gate either. It's pretty stable. You know, you get your couple of hundred people, and that's about it. If you can chance your arm at a bigger show, but then that needs a lot more preparation. But I will do that one day. So,
yeah, right.
Like I said, it's not that stressful to operate. But you know yourself, just running any event, there's a lot of people you need together, which is kind of that's the tricky part.
And you want to do it right. Whatever you do, you just want to do it right anyway, don't you? Yeah.
What's that? Sorry, it's breaking up a little bit.
Just say, and whatever you do, whatever event you put on, you want to do it right. You want to do it correctly. So you know, you always put the pressure on yourself.
I always put too much pressure on myself, and I find that it can haunt you because you don't live in and you don't appreciate the moments or the events that you're staging. So I've tried to kind of relax that a little bit.
Yeah, nice, mate. I want to go to a bit of a tough time in your life, and still quite recent in the boxing world, especially. If you don't mind me touching on Dwight Richie and your relationship with him. Unfortunately, Dwight lost his life last year in an incident that actually happened in sparring, even though boxing wasn't the real relevant factor.
The underlying cause, he had.
Yeah. Mate, so give us a bit of background on your history with Dwight and, you know, some of the good stories that we can remember him by.
Yeah, there's a lot with him. You know, I remember I remember when I first met him. So it was at Keith Ellis's gym. Keith was training him at the time, and the late Keith Ellis is a great trainer and a really good man too. But Keith was training him at the time, and like Dwight, people always would say in like recent years that Dwight had a bit of an edge, but when he first come from Shepparton, he was totally. You got to keep in mind, this is a kid that would ride his horse around town, like so just on like a normal suburban street, he'd be riding his horse. So he just come from a totally different existence, and he had no filter. So. I remember I had I was managing a kid called Fatai Nakeki at the time. It's just a limited guy, but a hard and tough guy. And the training in the same gym, and I'm watching Dwight train, and Dwight wouldn't talk to anyone. He just stare at him, like stare holes in him, and go about his business, and only really talk to Keith. But like the other fighters, he just gave them like a real look at disdain, if that makes sense. So anyway, one day he spars Fatai, and he's lighting up Fatai. Keep in mind, Fatai's like a former Commonwealth champion, and Dwight's still an amateur. Lighting him up, turning around, hitting him with 1-2, right? And he's calling him on. He's like, "Come on, mate, come on!" Calling him on. And this kid was like 17 at this time, maybe not even, but he would have just been 17. So. Lighting him up, but there was like stages in the sparring session where I was like, if this kid just used his toes and just used the surface of the ring more, he's got really, really underrated skills. Really, you know, got that real old school throwback indigenous style, just really fast hands, good timing, good control distance, not a lot of power, but he could put them together really well.
Was he a natural?
Yeah, I'd say he was a natural because the crazy part is, you know, Dwight essentially grew up without his father, Vasyl Richie, who was TV Ringside Prospect of the Year, I think in like 1971 or 72. But his boxing style was a spitting image of his father. That's a bizarre thing. Like he'd never really watched his dad box, yet he moved stylistically almost like an absolute mirror of him. Just Dwight's a better person, you know. But anyway, so I remember going up to him after the session. I said to him, mate, you're a beautiful boxer, but you don't need to stand and trade so much. And he just looks at me and goes, I'm a fucking fighter, mate.
Excellent.
And that was the whole temperament. And then I remember I'm there talking to Keith about some of the upcoming shows. And, you know, like I got so much respect for Paul Briggs. So I was talking to Keith about, you know, maybe Paul Briggs' upcoming fight or whatever it was. And Dwight walks over, he goes, did you say Paul Briggs? I said, yeah, why? He goes, I think he's fucking overrated. I was like,
oh.
I was like, at least with this kid, I know where I stand all the time. You know what I'm saying? And
yep.
Like, the shame with him is, like, I've seen that edge that he used to have, that it just about totally dissipated the last couple of years, and he become a lot more trusting where he understood the game, and he started to let people in. You know, he was starting to really show the man that he was and the man that he could become. And I feel like the good aspect is a lot of people saw that nationally with the profile pieces that ran leading into the Tim Tszyu fight.
Yeah.
But, you know, he was only 27 years of age. So from a boxing perspective, you look at it and you think that, you know, he still had his prime years ahead of him. But more than that, from a life perspective, man, like the next, whatever, you know, say if, you know, he would have lived to 80, basically 53 years that his kids are deprived of not having a father, and that's heartbreaking. That'll always be heartbreaking, you know.
Mate, I believe, I don't know exactly what happened. Hopefully you can touch on it. He fought before his 18th birthday, had a few professional fights, and they got classed as no contest later on. Yeah,
that I was in the periphery of all that. You know, I wasn't hands on. Let's just say that you know, Keith Ellis took some creative license with his birth certificate and other pertinent documentation, but nobody would have ever found out. But, you know, a couple of people with an agenda decided to start writing the boxing board and threatening that they were going to go public and go to Herald Sun and let other parties within the Victorian government know that a boxer had fought under their auspices underage. So that's what led to those 4 fights being no contests. But like Dwight always said, he knows he got in the ring and he knew he won.
Still experience anyway.
Yeah. The crazy part is, like, you look at those 4 fights and, like, he went to Sydney and knocked over Thomas Visakai. You know?
Yeah,
so
right.
That's a big upset at the time because Visakai was getting touted as a decent prospect and it had beaten Yao Yima on the way up. So at 17 years of age, like, you should get rewarded for beating guys like that at 17, not to have it taken from you.
Did he fight as an amateur at all, or was he just like local gym sparring?
Oh, like 8 fights.
Oh, did he? Is that all?
Yeah. He styled didn't suit the amateurs. He had like 8 fights. He was like 6-2. I've got a few of his amateur fights on DVD. Actually, I should put them online one day. But
that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, like a lot of the stuff like that I've been finding in this downtime is like I found a couple of Zarafa's amateur fights from back in the day.
Yeah, right.
Whites, like it's interesting. You just even guys like Blake Caparello, you go watch them. Yep. It's just so different, but you can see the early makings of what they're going to become.
One of the things I say to the guys that are just turning professional and they look at Anthony Joshua, Floyd Mayweather, and they're always watching how they are now, how we see them now. Yeah. And I say, you got to go back and watch their early fights, the one that no one cares about. That's how you've got to really see that they had flaws in their game. They didn't fight at such a slower pace. Like I watched an interview with Rio Ferdinand and Floyd Mayweather the other day. I don't know if you've seen it. I thought it was excellent. He was talking about the difference between Pretty Boy Floyd and Money Mayweather. He said two different fighters. Two different fighters. That was me, a young upstart, trying to blaze everyone away, trying to do this. He said, but when I got older, I got smarter and I learned the game and how I control a fight rather than just going into and just working really fast. You know, too many people look at the Floyd Mayweather we see now, try to emulate that without doing all this groundwork on the way up.
Yeah, and they put wrongful expectations on them because they're looking at what is essentially like close to a finished product or the finished product, rather than realizing that, you know, they need to develop and add other layers to the game. Look at, best one is like, look at Pacquiao. Pacquiao through to working with Freddie Roach initially as a junior featherweight, had no right hand. Very, very, very
Right.
underdeveloped. And like, he had no jab. He didn't
Early days.
Yeah, he didn't hook. He didn't really hook. He'd throw a winging hook, but he didn't have that real sharp, rapid-fire hook that we've been accustomed to seeing with Manny. And that's what I was saying earlier, that, you know, like, you've got to look at everything in life as a process of evolving. And just because a fighter you felt as an amateur wasn't what, you know, registered in your head as an elite fighter, you've got to look at it and think that they can grow and they can develop. You know, you watch so many of the star fighters as amateurs, and maybe as an amateur you're well with them, and now you go back and watch their fights and you're like, man, they were pretty average, you know. Like, because, but it's only you become accustomed to seeing, say, like you're saying, Floyd Mayweather, who he is now, or Joshua, who he is now. Even, you know, you drop it a slight degree in terms of, you know, because this guy learnt his craft in the pros, but go watch Canelo against Jose Miguel Cotto to what he is now. Go watch him then from there against Lamonadu to Victor Ortiz to all those fights. It's a completely different animal. The pacing, the style, everything.
I suppose that's one bit of advice that I like to, hopefully you'd back me on this, like to give to the young kids turning pro, that, yeah, exactly. Everybody wants to be at that top level. You've got so many steps to climb until you get there, and take your time. There's no rush. If you manage right, you train every day to try and improve the things that your coach has told you, you'll eventually get to your high. Whatever your high might be different to somebody else's high. I get that too. But one step at a time, and you've got more chance of making it than rushing.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like a lot of these kids coming through put too much pressure on themselves to succeed early rather than just learning their craft. And look, I understand it to a degree, because most athletes these days, unless you're signed to a major promoter out the gates, you got to become a salesman too. You've got to go out, you've got to sell the tickets. There's pressure on you to, you know, to ensure it's a good contest. They see they look at other people's social media and look at it with envy, not realizing that, you know, a lot of it's smoke and mirrors.
That's right.
Hey, look at my new glove sponsor, but it's a contra deal.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not. They might look like they're balling, but they're struggling more than you. But, you know, that first impression is, oh wow, you know, like Box Raw's working with this guy, or this company's working with this guy, not understanding the context of the deal.
Yep.
But I think that's where it's on people like us to just keep the kids in check and offer them the right guidance, you know, to not add to the pressure that they're already feeling.
And hopefully they'll take the guidance of people people that have been there or had a bit more experience. I've always said to one of our boxers, Jack Bowen, I've always said, because he loved Damien Hooper when he was a kid. He was like, even though he was in the same gym as him, he was awestruck when he was young. But I said, when Damien makes mistakes, I want you to learn from his mistakes so that you don't make the same mistakes. If you make mistakes, make ones that you haven't seen before. and then learn from those ones.
Absolutely. You know, that's a hard transition to make, because sometimes when when you look at someone with envy when they're younger, you don't see all their flaws.
Mm.
You know, I've been there with Lester Ellis. You know,
Yep.
where you kind of you look at him as the guy who rose to a world title when he was 19, and you know, but you also got to take lessons out of all of the adversity that he faced in trying to handle success, and you can learn from that, you know. But it's tough. It's tough because you still kind of, I don't know, when you really look up to someone, you still leave them on that pedestal, even if they fall. And
Yeah.
you don't want to see the fall, or you don't want to acknowledge it. It's painful.
And look, I suppose that as well, that can relate to boxers going on a bit too long. You always, like somebody like Roy Jones, for example, you know, he's always the greatest. He's always great in my mind, but you know, his last 10 fights haven't been great, have they?
This with Roy, last 20.
Yeah,
but
Roy, last 20 probably. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But let me ask you this: who looks at Ray Robinson, or Willie Pett, or Benny Leonard, or Henry Armstrong, or any of the other greats even Ali, and judges them by their post-prime run? You know,
True.
like you look at Robinson. Robinson was losing to guys the last 3 years of his career who were decent fighters, but that he would have annihilated 3-4 years earlier. But when he's 41 years of age, he's well over the hill. Roy was the same. I gauge Roy by the guy that ascended to, what was he, 49-1, going into the rematch with Tava. That's a guy.
Yep.
That's a guy that I respect and I look at. You know, you got to think this is a kid who had only lost a handful of times in the amateurs, gets shafted at the '88 Olympics.
Oh, that was terrible.
Oh, woeful. Terrible. And then the next time he gets beat is 16 years later. You got to look as a professional. Forget the fact he didn't get beat. He hardly lost a round for 16 years, and that's where I remember back in that era. And the same happened with Pernell Whitaker. Pernell Whitaker, when he was an active fighter then, people were saying he's top 5 of all time. You don't hear that now. You know, Roy, when he was active, people were saying he's top 10 of all time. Now you got these people that jump online and maybe they heard Teddy Atlas or someone say some shit where people say, oh, Roy Jones is just a reflex fighter, and once his reflexes slowed down, his lack of technical prowess caught up with him. And well, you know what? You must have pretty good fucking reflexes to be on top of the game for 10 years as a pound-for-pound elite. You know,
100%.
So respect him on that rather than try and cut him down. Because I see people do that and they then compare Roy to James Toney or Bernard Hopkins and make this argument that they were better fundamentally than him, which maybe they were. But you can't deny Roy's greatness when he was on top. You got to look at the guys he was dominating. You know, like no one dominated Reggie Johnson the way he dominated Reggie Johnson. You know, and that just kind of gets forgotten in history because people kind of look at him those last 20 fights and judge the accomplishments from years earlier on that when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Roy Jones Jr.
What an amazing athlete.
Yeah, exactly.
Mate, so, mate, I don't know if you've worked with these people or who's the biggest somebody that you thought, if you had worked with an athlete that you thought this is the one, and then totally just it didn't work out for them, or the other way around, or somebody that you thought, nah, this guy hasn't got much, and then he's come out and he's turned into a diamond at the end of it. Anybody that's totally flipped their lives around from how they started to how they finished?
I thought Dog Bay would be a pound for pound top tier fighter. Just that's a lesson on not to handle success. Of someone being overwhelmed by the spotlight or taking it for granted. And you know, as they say, what's the saying? hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work.
That's right.
You know, you go up to 160 pounds in between fights when you're fighting at 122, and you're going to pay a price against other elite fighters. You won't pay a price for it against the journeyman level fighters, but it'll catch up with you eventually. Look, that's a guy that won a world title and was successful making defense, but I still look at him and I think, you know, he could have been a pound for pound talent, but he let himself down, you know, and there's other underlying factors behind the scenes. No fault in the kid's courage when he gets into the ring, because he's an absolute warrior, but that was one there. The one that surprised me, because I wrote him off on the way up, and then when I worked with him, I started to understand what made him successful, was Billy the Kid Deb. I think that, you know, Billy, even to this day, because he's still active, you won't find a more driven athlete. You know, and I see these young kids who are on the way up, and none of them have the kind of hunger or thirst or love for the industry that kid has. You know,
is he really, really passionate? Is he?
Yeah, and he follows everything. Follows all the latest fights, all the latest news, looking to create opportunities for himself. And to do that when you've already had the layer of success that he's had in his life, it's mind-blowing. But it shows you why he become a champion. But he's won, like, on the way up, I was always like, oh, this is just another overhyped Australian prospect. And then
and he was a bit leery, wasn't it? We probably thought he was going to come unstuck with that style, but he got there, didn't he?
Exactly. But when I started working with him, I understood what kind of drove him, you know, what made him a great fighter. I think the one guy that fell short of his potential, but it's not his fault, was Lenny Zappa. Just the cuts. Nothing you can do about it, you know, like the guy would start shadow boxing and he'd be swelling. It's just what can you do?
Yeah. That's not a good trait to have as a fighter. When you were saying about Billy's passion and that he knows everything about the game and follows everything about the game, I see Michael Collins just joined us here. What an amazing fighter he is!
Belfast's finest son. I see he's been training hard, because it was funny. Initial days of ISO, he was on an eating bender. He was making a cake every day. And now I see he's got all this Bruce Lee talk in the gym. So I think that he's trying to work off 20 pounds of cake. I know Mick enjoys a couple snacks too. So please save some cake for me. Leave it to me. Send it to me. You keep the training. I'll keep the cake. Okay, son?
Mate, when we were talking about, we're just going back to the passion of Billy Dibb. I met Tyson Fury a few years ago when I took Paddy Murphy over there for a fight. I took the same out of Tyson Fury. Just sat down, we had breakfast one day, talking to him. His passion, he knew everything about any heavyweight in the world. Amateur boxers coming through. He knew about Alex Leopai, he knew about Lucas Brown, he knew about Solomon Hamono. These are guys that weren't even on his radar. But he was just so passionate and studied the game, as you do, and as you said, like Billy Dibb does. That passion, if you've got that passion, it's got to work for you one day.
It serves you well. And even if it doesn't serve you in that role, it serves you in other ways. Of being able to, you know, some fighters might have that passion and they fall short of their goal as a fighter, but then they channel that into becoming a great commentator or a great trainer. It works into other attributes, but I feel like it always serves you well in life, where if you have that mindset, you're going to overachieve. And that's you see that lacking in a lot of, especially in this era, because people want instant gratification. You know yourself, like you're one of our elite trainers in Australia, but you've been at this case for a long time, and I'm sure you get people all the time that come in and say, Gareth, I want to work as a trainer, and then 3 months later, they think they're just going to knock you off your perch and all the fighters are going to roll out with them. But it serves to have an apprenticeship in this game. It serves to put in the time and learn as an assistant and get your fundamentals right, because learning any craft, takes a body of work. It doesn't happen instantly.
Happens all the time, all the time in gyms, and I suppose in any aspect of life as well. People, like you said, instant gratification. They want to leave school and be the CEO of a company. Well, guess what? You got some work to do before that happens.
Yeah, exactly right. But like I was saying earlier, you also don't want to be stuck in the role either.
That's right.
I was reading a story yesterday about the woman who started as a waitress at Applebee's and ascended to president of the country, applied to be applied to be CEO, and they overlooked her because they felt she didn't fit the position. She went to IHOP, become the CEO of IHOP, and ended up acquiring Applebee's. So as the CEO
there you go. There you go.
So that shows you put the time in. She worked all the way up from apprentice to head to president. And when she got overlooked as the head of the company, she went to another company, reached a higher position, and bought that company. So that shows you what can happen if you put the work in. You can grow. But it's a process over 15, 20, 25 years. It doesn't happen overnight.
That's right. And another thing that I like to say to guys as well about the losses along the way would eventually make you. They sort of give you so much strength. Everybody looks at, when we see on television, okay, Golovkin's amateur record, I don't even know it, but I'm just making it up. 3 losses, 300 wins. Mayweather's very similar. And they talk about all the greats have got this. So young kids that have had 15 losses out of 30 fights, they think it's over then because that's all they're seeing. But to me, that's bullshit. The losses actually make you.
Let me tell you something else. You mentioned a few guys. Lomachenko's only lost 1 amateur fight. You know how we know that? There's no other fights have surfaced that he lost. It's only that defeat to Salem over the World Championships. But most of those amateur records are falsified. I know because it comes to guys like myself, and you sign someone and you're like, all right, what was your amateur record? And I had about 100 fights. How many did you win? Maybe 70. And then you're like, okay, so all of a sudden you put out a PR piece and he becomes 84 and 16 as an amateur. And
100%.
And people roll with that. They don't realize that there's so many of these kids, and that's what I was saying to you. Like Vincent has said, Crawford lost his first 2. And guess what? Mikey Garcia lost twice to Crawford in the amateurs.
Yeah.
Crawford lost to Jerry Belmonte twice. Who would look at that, right? And Jerry Belmonte is a very underrated talent, even though he's maybe I'm going to get his record wrong, but he ended up maybe 23-10, 23-11. But he beat Will Tomlinson. He's a good boxer on his night. But
yeah, right.
You go and look at Crawford, and you look at the growth of he lost to Belmonte's twice, but when he turned over pro, no one was saying, "Oh wow, Gary Belmonte's beat him twice, so he's going nowhere."
That's right. After spending time in Cuba, I remember those guys, like over here, and I'm guessing England and Europe, a lot of places, everything's done so strict with the Blue Book of Amateur Boxing. Everything's written in. Those guys, they don't even care. Cuba, the best boxing country, or best amateur boxing, or most successful, I'll say, amateur boxing country in the world. They don't even give a fuck about this Blue Book thing. They just take it to international fights. I remember them saying, "Oh, if these kids lose today, they'll go and box at a club tomorrow. There's heaps of clubs that we can have fights at, and they have in-club challenges. To them, they're fights, but they're not on the books, and they probably lose 100 of those."
Exactly. I always thought we rigged though, because people run with that number. What did they say was 272-4 or something?
Something like that, yeah.
And if you realistically look at his record, it's about 150-4. The rest of the wins, who knows? There could be 100 more. There could be 20 less than what's suggested there. It's like you said, because it's not really registered. There's no record keeping effectively of it,
Like you said, if Vasyl Lomachenko had 350 amateur fights and only lost 1, I don't know. I don't know if I can believe that.
Well, he's only lost one because there's no record of him losing any others. But
That's right. No one wants to know.
I think, again, I'm with the minority.
Mm.
I think there's creative license with about 200 wins on his amateur record.
Mm.
I can't see it from the volume of how much he was fighting internationally in the seniors. I can't think that he was having 20, 25 fights a year in the Ukraine before that and in between that to keep building those numbers.
Yeah, that's right. It's just, and again, like
the great PR thing, you know.
Yeah, and like I said, what it actually does, these kids lose a few fights at 14 years old, 15 years old. They think, oh, I'm rubbish, but I'm not going to make it because Mayweather only lost 3 or whatever. You know, I'm like, no.
Yeah, well,
and then we've got to.
It's become a record-conscious era, but I think
Right.
If you look at the junior middleweight division, you've got to take a lot of stock out of that. You know, and that Williams beat Hurd, and you know, Williams just got robbed by Jason Rosario, who had lost an early career fight to Nicholson. And if you look at the kind of the dichotomy of how it works, if A beats B and B beats C, then none of it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? But that's the way the sport is. You might have a bad night, or someone has a great night. You know, people evolve from losses. We need to stop demonizing a defeat.
That's right. It's any successful person. When you talk to them, and let's take this away from boxing, they talk so much about the struggle that they've had to get there. And that's actually what's really made them have a strong heart, have thick skin, and go, fuck this, I'm going to keep going. You know, like business people, whatever people have been successful. Every successful person's gone through a bit of hardship.
Absolutely. Yeah, even if it might not be, say, a loss on the record per se, there's still a lot that they need to overcome, you know. But yeah, I think that look, it's a hard era we're in, especially because of how things work with sponsorship and people building a following and everything, you know. And you see it all the time that someone wins a fight and they immediately will post about it on social media. But if they take a loss, it takes a few days to process because that's how devastating it is. And that's not knocking anyone in that spot, because I look at emotionally how much it must take it out of them to acknowledge that, because you've grown up in an era where you're told that perfect is Floyd Mayweather's record. And to try something less than that. I'm not saying to have a loser's mentality, but if you do get beat, you might lose, but you shouldn't remain defeated. I see a lot of these people, they lose or have a tough fight and they stay defeated because of the process of thinking. You know, we've got actually Muhammad Wasim with us now. Like, look at, like, Muhammad's one of the top tier fighters that we represent. He fought another kid we represent, Marudi Matalani, for the world title. And it was a terrific fight. And the majority decision went Maruti's way. So Muhammad Wasim comes out of that fight 8-1. And if you're in this era where you're looking, oh, he's 8-1. He was 8-1, losing a majority decision, fighting an all-time great for the world title. So you can't tell me now that he's 10-1 now, 11-1. He's 10-1. You can't tell me his 10-1 record is the same as a local ticket seller who's 10-1 that's handpicked every opponent.
And I think that happens with Australians going to the next level too, or similar things like, oh yeah, we've got to say I'm ready, and then sometimes we jump a little bit too high because we've got a similar record. Look at the opposition, and you know, it's a totally different level.
It's a different development, because here boxing's a very, very small diaspora here, whereas there's, say, everyone talks about, you know, Mexico, but even you go to other places, Japan, it's a proper industry in places like that, you know, whereas, you know, in Australia, it's a very, very small community, so you don't have the volume of sparring. You don't have the journeyman opponents to develop your fighters here. Generally, generally, if someone's a journeyman here, they're a part-time fighter who is just cashing in. The journeymen here aren't comparable to a journeyman in the UK, like Willie Warburton, or who's some of the other notable guys there. Like Warburton's always my favourite. Christian Lake back in the day with 300 fights, you know. Ibra, Riaz, there's so many of them in the UK that, you know, 8 wins, 113 losses, Louis Van Poach.
But they actually know how to fight.
Yeah, and your young fighters learn their craft and develop, whereas here someone's a journeyman if they're 1-14 and they've been knocked out 12 times because they're a part-time junkie and they need their latest hit, so they just took a fight. That's
100%.
That's a reality.
How can that be managed? It's just, I guess it comes to we just don't have the numbers.
The volume's just not there. Yeah. The volume is just not there. But I think part of it comes with, firstly, rewarding the fighters, like those kind of fighters, and then putting them in the right kind of fights. So, you know, like if you look at it, and that's where we need to take it on ourselves as promoters. So you look at a journeyman level fighter. I remember, like, one of the great journeymen in the region was Paz Vija. Actually, I turned him.
Oh, yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
He had 60 fights in 2.5 years. But he went, like, I think 0-6 or 0-7 his first 7 and got knocked out 5 times. And then he learnt the caper of how to survive, how to go rounds. But you need, at least every 10 fights, you need to throw a guy like that an opportunity that they can win. You can't match them. You can't match them every time with a hotshot amateur turning professional. You've got to put them in fights where maybe they win a round, maybe so that they're getting better and they're staying encouraged to remain in the blasted out in a round. 5 times in a row, they're gone.
Yeah, that's not good for anybody, is it?
They're going to have a very negative perception of the sport. So
yeah,
plugging my phone into the battery.
No, we're going to drop out, are we?
No, we're good.
Oh no, we're good.
But yeah, I think that's how to change it. But also, we're in a country that there's now the numbers grown a bit, but there's under 120 registered fighters, and I think that affects how the sport works here as well.
It's amazing when you talk to general public and say so and so is a professional boxer. They all of a sudden they think your guy must. He's made it on. He's on 500 grand a year, like a footballer. Well, unfortunately, anybody can turn professional. They've just got to be able to sell some tickets, and they can, they'll be wanted on a show. But
exactly,
it's just, I think, lack of television. Lack of media in boxing sort of all adds to that, doesn't it? That's why if the public don't know about it, then they can't turn up.
Yeah, look, our fighters get some decent mainstream coverage, but it's not consistent because of the lack of the mainstream TV platform. Because even say, for example, and I know Fox Sports have been trying, but you'll see the guy profiled the week they're fighting, but there's nothing in between. There's no follow-up. There's no regular boxing program to maintain the fans like there is, say, with rugby league or AFL, where imagine you have the fight night on the Saturday, and there's a fallout in the discussion of the show on the Monday. There's no programming like that to keep it relevant. So essentially, once that 2-hour block of TV or 3-hour block of TV is done, there's no flow on from that until the next event, which might be 5 months later.
That's right, and it might actually be another athlete on that event, somebody else. So there's no, like you said, there's no.
The guy not programmed year round, and I know that it's you can sit back and just say, oh, we need to be profiled better, but I think it shows that the sport isn't mainstream here unless you're an elite talent. So unless you're fighting for the title, and people always like Mundine and Green and talk about their rivalry, but that was heavily built on two things. It was built on the back end of Mundine being our most high-profile crossover athlete and being very, very relevant in the media in rugby league. And also on Danny Green early days having Jeff Fennick as a mouthpiece, who had a lot of clout and sway in Australian media at the time.
Mate, talking about Australian media and Jeff Fennick, I remember when Anthony Mundine, he was on Fox Sports or something, and Jeff and, was it Ian McLeod, walked in on the interview. Can you remember it?
Yeah. And
it's like they ambushed the interview, didn't they, and put it out to him. Who else was there? It wasn't just Ian McLeod. Was it Nader? No, it wasn't Nader, because they said they'd never fight, didn't they, at one stage?
McLeod? Yeah, there was McLeod. I'm trying to think who else early days. Bajero?
Was it Bajero? They fought, didn't they, for the Australian title?
Yeah.
They fought McLeod as well eventually.
Yeah, Chock actually, he might have, I think he fought McLeod before Bajero.
Oh, he did too. He did, like his third fight or something like that.
Zos, Tamafai, Heath Stenton, McLeod, and then I'm trying to think, was it Bajero after that? And then
Bajero was about fourth or fifth, and then it went like people like Mike Mercado, those sort of guys, didn't it, I think?
Yeah, then went, I think, was it Mercado, Masur, and then remember he fought in Canada, he fought Kevin Pompey in Canada.
Oh, he did, and then there would have been like the Guy Waters and those guys?
Yeah. That was before Sven Oki. So you had Darren Oba, was it Darren Oba, and then Guy Waters?
Yeah. Geez, that punch that he hit Guy Waters with was a punch. That was a cracker.
Yeah, I think that Guy got a little bit overconfident.
Yeah.
So Guy was one of those fighters that he was a real good classical boxer, but he's upright and kind of a perfect foil for a fast-handed, fast-twitch athlete like Mundine at that time.
Geez, Monday could pop it. He had some pop in his punch at the time as a super middleweight.
Bro, even like, remember the right uppercut, left hook against Rogelio Cacciatore? Like, anyone walks into that, they're in trouble. You know?
Yeah.
People forget how good a fighter he was, especially like that first night with Danny Green against Eccles, against Mikhail Kessler. People forget.
And what he did to Sam Solomon. Where Sam wasn't getting beat. Nobody could hit Sam at that time.
Yeah, he timed him. It's beautiful timing.
3 knockdowns, was it? First fight?
The second fight. First fight was second. Yeah,
it was. That's why they fought again. That's right, yeah.
Second fight, he dropped him heavy around from memory and then finished him in the ninth. He dropped him, I think, twice in the ninth.
But like anybody says, Sam Solomon is the hardest person to spar because he moved his head. He was so awkward and he had his own style and it worked for Sam, but nobody could read it, could they? But then, obviously for Chock to time him at the time, it was, like you said, they forget how good he was.
I will say this in Sam's defense, because I know that fight was the start of his knee problems, the second fight.
Oh, right, yep.
Definitely getting timed and getting knocked down didn't help it. But prior to him having knee problems, you could count on one hand how many times he got hit clean in boxing and kickboxing. Just incredible mover. So awkward.
You know what? Sam Solomon adds to what we were just saying about before, how you just got to keep going. If you're passionate about something, he became IBF world title after losing to Anthony Mundine and having other losses in his career.
He was 11-7 at the start of his career.
It was IBF, wasn't it?
Yeah, Felix Stone.
If you've had between 10 and 15 fights over here, you're looking to fight those 11-7 guys, and you think you've got it pretty comfortably, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
But we're talking about a future world champion.
Sam Sullivan rolls in. I remember when I think he was 15-7, and he beat Nader Hamden, and Nader Hamden was 32-9. It just shows you everything about records.
Yeah, that's right. Mate, so you're working with a few Australian athletes at the moment. Obviously, I don't know how many, a dozen or so. Is that right? About right?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
So obviously, was Rowan your last? I suppose big fight. Obviously, Jack and Taylor fought their pro debuts. Rowan fought just before that. Did you have anybody else? Any other Aussies?
Mateo Tapia.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. He fought
he crushed
Dubai.
Junior in Dubai. Yeah, we had TJ Doney there. He
Yep.
lost the stock 8 rounder. Looking to bring him back. He's probably the first cab off the rank. Once we can actually travel and fight out of COVID-19, because I think he deserves a break. But yeah, TJ Doney, Billy Dibb, Paul Fleming's still there, Luke Jackson, Nathaniel May. So yeah, quite a few talents. I'm just trying to think who else I'm forgetting. Hopefully they're not tuning in. Floyd Mason.
Has Jacko fought this year?
No. His last fight was August last year. He was actually gearing. He was supposed to fight just this weekend past.
Right. What about the run he did?
He's out of this world, that kid. He's
fucking madness.
He's one of the few fighters that I need to call and always tell him just to find a balance and slow down. So he's the opposite of what you want in that respect, in that I want him to have some normality in his life, because the problem is when you thrash your body to the limit, you either get injured or you mentally burn out. But I know that Luke's one of those kids that thrives off of having a motivation. But it concerns me, you know. It always concerns me, because I'm just like, it's mileage on the odometer, you know.
Yeah.
It's insane what he accomplished with the running, but he's also, you know, he needs them legs for his future fights. So I don't want to see
burn him out,
burn himself out, end up picking up an injury from pushing his body beyond its limits, you know.
Yeah.
But mentally fascinating case study, him, because what he's been able to achieve and accomplish in his life, it's amazing. You know, it's been all through hard work and attrition, so he knows no other way.
Well, I think Jacko, when he went to the Com Games, I think he'd only had like 15 amateur fights or something.
Yeah, and it only been a couple of years out of being a reformed junkie.
Yeah, right.
Think about it like that, you know. But he's found the motivation in boxing, and he's one of the smartest guys I work with, and that he knows how to decode styles really well. And I think that back then he knew how to tuck up defensively, and knew kind of how to utilize that style and that amateur system to beat guys that maybe people would look at and figure were more talented, because it appeared they had more weapons. But Luke had the best weapon, which was between his head. He's a better thinker. Had the right selection of punches at the right time. You know, he's someone that you'd tab as like an overachiever. But I think that's incorrect as well, because although it's right in one breath, you shouldn't take away from his intelligence or his commitment.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Sean Gibbons joining the chat.
Oh, I see that.
Mr. Viva himself. So, Team Manny Pacquiao, Viva Senator. But yeah, Sean's incredible. He's one of the best brains I've ever encountered in the sport, and a really, really good-hearted person. Does a lot of good things for a lot of people around the world that just totally fly under the radar.
Yeah.
But I owe a lot in my boxing journey to Sean, because he's helped to position fighters and create opportunities for us around the world.
Wow.
He's a reason why guys like TJ Doney and Maruti Matalani and that secured an opportunity at a world title, because he was hustling non-stop for us.
Through you, I met Sean in China a couple of years ago there, and yeah, like you said, a great-hearted man. He had all the time in the world. No matter how busy he was, he had time for you if you wanted to chat and pick his brain. Yeah, really good man.
And he fought Mickey Rourke as well.
Did he?
Yeah, they drew.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
I've never seen the fight, but I'll go on record and declare that Sean was robbed. Also, we've got 92 US Olympian Pepe Riley. He's a very, very decent trainer as well, out of the wildcard gym. So good to see you.
Just join us.
Yeah, he's a good man, Pep, as well.
So what's coming up? How do you see the future? You said you see it behind closed doors. Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be very hard for local fights to happen behind closed doors, like we've said, with the revenue and everything like that. If you can only have 300 people in a venue that normally holds 700,
Yeah.
you know, it's going to be really hard for local guys to put on. Do you see any smaller shows going ahead, or do you only see the top show? How do you see it coming back? Like,
I think smaller shows can happen, but you've got to know how to piece together a concept and sell it. So
I don't think you can be paying overs either.
no, and this is an idea I was floating. So if someone steals it, I'm onto you. But like, say with a lot of these fights that are being televised they're going to be televised internationally. If you don't have a decent name, you've got to come up with a concept. So maybe you run an event, you have two tournaments. So you have 2 4-man tournaments on an event, and you run them back to back. So you run those 2, and then you run the next week, and you run another 4-man tournament, and then the winners of those 2 tournaments fight each other, say 6 weeks later. So hey, it's not too dissimilar to what you did with the EFG, was it?
EBC, yeah.
EB, close enough.
B for boxing, Mike.
I was going with Fight Club.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So not too dissimilar to that. I think if you run a concept like that, then that opens up that you could have like a handy 8-rounder as your main event, and a couple 6-round fights in between. So you got, you know, say 5 fights each week. So or you could go 7, say 2 float, but you can keep the expenses down. And if you can secure 10 grand in sponsorship, and then internationally the TV money will be about 20,000. So $30,000. If you can keep the overheads down, you can run that event. That would be the way to run it. You're not going to make any money, but you're not going to lose either, to be able to structure something like that. And at least you give something that's interesting for TV, because the guys on the undercard might not be household names, but you're building something. You can profile them in between, and then you build to the finals.
Generally, those guys that aren't household names, they're actually quite exciting to watch over 4-round fights.
Well, and it's competitive.
Yeah, you know, they'll have a crack.
Oh, like I know domestically, there's a lot of fights we could do around, say, the welterweight, even the super middleweight limit, where there's guys that might be 2-1 or 1-0 or whatever, but they're happy to take a chance. So I think that's how you'd be able to operate that and make it functional. It's still gonna be sterile because no real crowd or anything, you know. So there's things that you need to bring in different TV production values in order to build an atmosphere, because otherwise people aren't going to want to watch a cold product beyond a few installments. But I think that's how we can get over it in their time, is by running events of that nature. At least it's some outlet. Is it ideal? No. Is it what we're accustomed to? No. But at least it's given some outlet to keep the fighters active. And then what you do, like the fighters we have, like a Jack Bowen, a Taylor Robertson, you profile them on that. So you're always building the future as well.
Touching on profiling, you mentioned it before, the elite athletes that get, the elite fighters like your AJs, your Furies that get media coverage all the time. There's only, let's be honest, there's only probably 4 or 5 in the world that are actually household names.
Yeah.
How important do you believe for the athlete themselves it is to build their profile?
Oh, it's everything.
On a lower level, obviously, it's so important.
It's everything. I find it fascinating. I think I've told you this.
Oh, Mike, we've only got 25 seconds left. I'll let you wrap it up. Yep, with this.
I've told you this off camera before. Luke Jackson, a lot of people will say to me, I want you to do for me what you've done for Luke's career. All of his profiling is himself. You're the you got to think you're the CEO of the company, so you've got to build your brand, put yourself out there, and go from there. Hopefully,
excellent.
25 seconds.
We'll cut. Yep, we're in 3 seconds.